Most of us think of a constitution as a big, complicated rule book for a country, a list of do's and don'ts. But what if it's more than that? What if it actually has a soul, a conscience that's meant to guide the nation toward a better, fairer future? Well, that's exactly the idea we're going to get into today with India's Directive Principles of State Policy.
So just think about this for a second. The laws tell a government what it must do, right? But what tells it what it should do? What points it in the right direction towards justice and equality for everyone? That's what we're talking about. A moral compass built right into the Constitution.
All right, let's dive into our first section. The easiest way to think about these principles is like a giant, long-term to-do list for the entire nation, one that was written by the people who framed the Constitution. So, what are they officially? They're called the Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSPs for short, and you'll find them in Part 4 of the Constitution. Now, the key thing to remember is that they aren't strict laws. They're more like directions or a philosophical blueprint for any government that's in power.
Yeah, think of them as the big aspirational ideas, the lofty thoughts, if you will. They're basically the destination on a map, guiding every law and every policy towards that ultimate goal of creating a more just and fair society for all.
And these amazing ideas didn't just appear out of thin air. The framers of India's constitution looked all around the world for inspiration. They drew from the Irish Constitution, the French Revolution, the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi, and even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's like they wove this incredible global tapestry of ideas into something uniquely Indian.
Okay, so this brings us to a really important point. I'm sure you've heard of fundamental rights. So how are these directive principles different? This distinction is absolutely key, so let's break it down.
This is the million-dollar question, right? Both are in the Constitution, and both are trying to make India a better place. But the way they work, their actual function, is completely different.
This table really lays it out clearly. On one side, you've got the directive principles in Part 4. These are goals for the state to achieve. On the other side, you have fundamental rights in Part 3, which are legal protections that you, as a citizen, can demand. One is about building a social and economic welfare state, while the other is about guaranteeing political democracy.
So, here it is, the single most important difference: justiciality. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's simple. If one of your fundamental rights is violated, you can literally walk into a court and demand justice. They are justiciable. But you can't sue the government for not achieving a directive principle. That's a moral duty for them, not a legal right for you. They are non-justiciable. That's the big takeaway.
Now, you might be thinking, well, if you can't take the government to court over them, what's the point? That's a fair question. And this is where we see how these big, abstract ideas actually become real-world actions that impact millions of people. See, every government is expected to use these principles as their North Star when they're making new laws or launching new programs. It's all about bringing those ideals to life. Let's look at a few examples of how this actually happens.
Okay, so take the principle of improving public health. How do you turn that into action? Well, a huge example is the Ayushman Bharat scheme. This is a massive public health insurance program that gives coverage to literally millions of vulnerable families. That's a constitutional principle becoming a real-life policy. Or how about this one? The principle of ensuring a decent standard of life, which includes housing. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, a scheme that gives people financial help to build their own homes, is a direct attempt to fulfill that promise, one brick at a time.
And then there's the Ujjwala Yojana. This one tackles the principle of raising the standard of living by giving clean cooking gas to women in poorer households. And this is a big deal. It's not just about convenience, it's about health and saving women from the dangers of inhaling smoke from old-fashioned stoves.
And one more, how do you promote economic inclusion? One answer was the Jan Dhan Yojana, a huge push to make sure every household had access to a bank account. This brought hundreds of millions of people into the formal banking system, many for the very first time. You can draw a straight line from the constitutional idea right to that nationwide policy.
So, when you look at all these different policies and principles together, what's the big picture? What's the ultimate goal that they're all pushing towards?
The goal is to build something called a welfare state. And I love this definition. It's a state that works to ensure the maximum happiness of the maximum number of people. So it's not just about having the freedom to vote, it's about making sure as many people as possible have social and economic security.
Exactly. This means the state has what's called a positive duty. It doesn't just sit back and let things happen.
It's supposed to actively step in to make sure every single person has social and economic justice and can live a life with dignity.
So, when you boil it all down, the real power of these principles is in three things. First, they're a pledge, a promise from the founders of the nation. Second, they're a practical guide for every government. And third, for all of us, they're a yardstick we can use to judge how well our government is actually performing.
So let's bring it all home. Why does any of this really matter? Why should we care about a set of guidelines from over 70 years ago that we can't even enforce in court?
Because they are the soul of the Constitution. They are truly the nation's conscience. While all the laws make up the body, these principles provide the moral compass. They are a constant reminder of the just, equitable, and compassionate society India is always aspiring to become.
Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If their power doesn't come from a courtroom or a judge, then where does it really come from? Maybe, just maybe, their real power comes from us, the people, who can use these promises to hold our leaders accountable. What do you think?